Year 12s. So I just want to start this series of introduction to each of the mini topics by looking at topic 1.1. So topic 1 is about human rights. Topic 1 is describe key terms using legal terminology, including human rights, governance, treaty, state sovereignties, signatory treaty, convention, multilateral, bilateral, ratification, Bill of Rights, and Royal Commission. Now, as well as these, I also want to think about some of the ideas of what human rights is all about. And Amnesty International reminds us that there's three elements around human rights. Human rights are universal, they belong to all of us. They're inalienable, they can't be taken away from us, and they're indivisible and interdependent. So governments can't pick and choose which rights are respected. So there's three important elements around that. And we're going to look at what human rights are later, but they're things like the right to education, the right to life, the right to a job in safe working conditions. But let's go through these definitions one by one. So the first is human rights. So human rights are the fundamental rights that are considered to belong to every person, regardless of race, gender, age, nationality, or religion. The fundamental rights. So a covenant is an important statement, specifically looks to protect human rights. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is a treaty that protects fundamental civil and political rights, like the right to vote. It talks about the right to a fair trial. And then it includes freedom of expression, freedom of movement, the right to a fair trial. Treaties are formalised agreements between two or more nations about a particular area of interest. So human rights is one of those areas of interest. Often we hear about trade treaties. States, so it's often best to think about as nation states. States are the countries as having a legal standing under international law with like a defined territory. So Australia is a nation state. We know where our borders of Australia are. It's easy because we're an island. It has a government. It has a permanent population. Sovereignty is about the rights of nation states to govern their own affairs. So human rights establish those fundamental rights for everyone, but sovereignty still means that states have the right to make decisions about what happens in their own area. A signatory treaty means that you've signed, a nation state has signed and is committed to be bound by an agreement. A convention is an international agreement or treaty between governments. So we're going to look at some of those conventions. Look at this one up here, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. And somewhere around 170, 180 countries have signed and agreed to be part of that. So that's signing to that. So those countries are signatories to those treaties. And that's what a convention is there. Multilateral means it's signed, some agreement is signed by more than two states. Bilateral is two states, two nation states. So bi meaning two, like bicycle. Ratification. So this is the process of adopting an obligation involved through signing a treaty into Australian law by passing the legislation. It's not just Australian law, it's any country that signs. They then have to take that human rights, if it's a human rights treaty that they've signed, take that and bring it into their local law. So, for example, we'll look later on at the way human rights are considered in passing legislation, and that's related in Australia, and that's related to this idea that we've signed up to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And so because of that, every time we sign a bill, we consider the human rights impact of that. That's part of the process of ratification. Bill of Rights, we do not have a Bill of Rights in Australia, but it's a formal declaration of the legal civil rights of a citizen of a state, country or federation. Royal Commissions, these are fairly formal events, and there's extra on the Royal Commission on the Check Home page related to this mini topic. So it's a federal government inquiry established by the Governor-General into a matter of significance. So, for example, Aboriginal deaths in custody, and it's supported. So there was legislation passed in 1902, the Royal Commission Act, that allowed these inquiries to happen, and the inquiries gather evidence, make a report back to the government with a bunch of recommendations. And so they can be about things around human rights, like the Aboriginal deaths in custody. There's a more recent inquiry into the treatment of elderly Australians. Non-refoulement's one we may have looked at a little bit in the assignment, the practice of not forcing refugees, asylum seekers back to a country where they're liable to be subject to persecution or harm. So the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has it this way: under international human rights law, the principle of non-refoulement guarantees that no one should be returned to a country where they would face torture, cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment or other irreparable harm. So it's being very careful about when an asylum seeker might come to seek protection in Australia, they're saying they're being persecuted, which is the definition of a refugee, then that country, that obligation falls on Australia not to send them back to be exposed to harm. So there's a bunch of different definitions there. And if we go back to where we started, we've talked through all these key elements, the key definitions of human rights.